Welcome to another video by Pharos Technology. Today we're going to talk about a thing called branching structures, which are structures such as if-then statements, do loops, and case-else statements that allow you to make decisions to do certain things based on conditions. So let's get started. So today I'm going to show you using a popular tool that's out there called Notepad++. And the reason it's nice is because programmers will use it a lot because it really caters to programmers. It's not just a notepad in a traditional sense. It's a notepad that actually understands programming languages embedded in it. So how I'm going to show it to you basically is you can choose a language here. So all of these I've put in a Visual Basic language, which is very close to Visual Basic for applications. It'll show everything that I need to show. So in this Visual Basic mode, you'll be able to see the highlighters the same as you would in your coding window in VBA. So here we want to show you the first branching structure is an if-then statement. And the very simplest way to represent if-then is just on a single line. If a city equals Dallas, then the state equals Texas. Very simple. If it doesn't equal Dallas, then it will just not execute. A state won't get Texas. If it is Dallas, they'll execute it and go on to the next statement. So very simple one. If it is, it executes. If it isn't, it doesn't execute. It just moves on. The next iteration of this is putting it in multiple lines. You'll notice that the if S city equals Dallas, then all of that's on the same line. You have your executable code in the middle. In other words, your condition, S state equals Dallas, and then end if. So when it's on multiple lines, Access needs to know, or VBA needs to know, when the end of the if statement happens. Now, the reason for a multiple line version is sometimes you want to put more than one line of code. Well, in the single line version, it can only look at one condition or run one piece of code, and then you're done. So here it allows you to put multiple pieces of, multiple statements of code here to run in between the if and the end if. Now, it gets a little bit more complex in that you can have what they call an else statement. In other words, if you run the if statement and it doesn't meet that first condition, you can have a default condition. That's your else condition. It will default to Michigan and the tax rate if it's not in the city of Dallas. So let's go to the fifth version here. Now, here you've got multiple if statements. So here you got if it's Dallas, then Texas. Else, if S city equals Detroit, then we're going to be state of Michigan and give the tax rate. And then you've got the default thing. In this case, we're going to use Oregon and give it that tax rate in Oregon. The else if lets you check for an alternate condition. So here we've got a situation where we can check both whether the city is Dallas or the city is Detroit, and then bail out afterwards and have our else statement or the default that follows. Okay, so the next case is embedded if statements, okay, or nested if statements. So here we've got if state equals Michigan, then it'll run whatever it is here. Now in our if else statement, similar to that, we have another if statement in here for Detroit. And then we have an else if of Kalamazoo, and then we have an else statement here, tax rate is 0. So this allowed us to check for two different cities embedded in the one state, and both of those cities belonged to the state. So by nesting them, we can check for multiple conditions. This could get relatively complex, and thus, after a while, you might want to use some other type of branching statement to handle more complex issues. And we'll get to that here in a few moments. Now, if you have a Boolean variable, this is a valid statement. If S buyer is true, then is in purchasing is also true, because if they're a buyer, obviously they're in purchasing in the department and within the company. Else, they're not in purchasing, okay? And then we could end. But the thing is, a Boolean is already either true or false. So you can then say it like this. If is buyer, if that variable is true, doesn't need to say equals true because that's redundant, then is in purchasing equals is buyer. Well, is buyer is true, therefore is in purchasing equals true. So you're assigning the value of is buyer to is in purchasing if is buyer is true. So it can be really condensed there when you're using Boolean type of variables. The next one I want to talk about is the case statement. Now the case statement looks like this. We're looking at the case being the tax rate. The tax rate, if the case is that the tax rate is below 0.03, then you send a message box that says that there's low taxes in that area. If the case that it's over 0.07, then they have high taxes. And our else statement is going to be what's in between there, saying they must be average taxes if they're between those two levels. So a case statement can check for not just these, but it can check for a multitude of different conditions and assign different actions based on all of those conditions. Like we could say, if case is less than 0.03 but greater than 0.01, for example, we could do that here and have multiple different levels of checks that we want to employ. So that is the way that you can employ and use a case statement. Now the next kind of construct is what they call a do loop. And this allows you to do something until a condition is true. So in this particular one, it's a little snippet out of a much larger piece of code that we'll learn more about later in looping through a database. Now, what this is saying is this database called RST, we're going to loop until it reaches the end of file being a keyword. So we're going to loop until it gets to the end of the file, and in that we're going to debug.print. In other words, we're going to print to a debug window the last name. And then we're going to move to the next record. And then we're going to loop again and do the same thing over and over and over again. And what this in essence does is it prints a list of the last name out to your debug window. I have used a do loop many, many times to when I know I needed to loop through an entire table or entire query that has a filter to a certain number of records in a table, and loop through and make a change or do any sort of code. The last one here is a for next loop. Now here I've given you the entire code setting up the dimensions. So one beep is going to be a long integer. One beep count is going to be a long. And one beep count we're going to set to 5. So we're going to start with one beep equals 1 to the value of one beep count, which is going to be 5. So from 1 to 5, we're going to beep. And we're going to keep beeping until one beep count gets to 5. So this is one way that you can send out an error beep or something to the computer to alert your users and then modify the length of time that beep continues until it's over. Okay, so that's a for next loop. Lots of different ways that you can use for next loops. All you have to consider is what to put in the center of the for next loop to execute each time it goes through that loop. So those are what they call the branching constructs. All of them, from if then to the for next statement, are encased in the VBA language, Visual Basic for Applications. So I hope you got some good value out of this. If you did, please hit that like button. Let's get this out to more people. Otherwise, also, if you would, subscribe, and let's help grow the channel, and we can get this out to ever more people. Thanks.